Ladies and gentlemen, it is here. The RF by Wilson RF01 Pro, successor to the RF97, and new racket of choice for the now retired but eternal Roger Federer. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets Runners. So after that introduction, I hope you're all on the edges of your seats because this is the most excited I've been for a review since we started this channel. Roger Federer is a major part of the reason for why I initially fell in love with tennis, and I'm sure that's true for a lot of you. He's one of my favorite athletes of all time, and watching him at Wimbledon was a huge part of my summers growing up. So as you can imagine, when I first heard he had a new line of rackets coming out, I was pretty excited. I really don't care if he's retired or not. It was pretty obvious his brand was always going to stick around, so for me, this is awesome. Now, of course, before we get into all things RF01 Pro, let me remind you that any of the rackets we talk about on this channel you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. Also, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me in the store on Instagram, and let me know in the comment section what you want me to cover next. So the RF01 Pro is the heaviest racket in the RF01 lineup, and if you do want to learn a little bit more about the whole RF01 line, we're going to have a more introductory video also coming out today, which you can check out after this one. The 01 Pro, though, is the racket that Federer initially developed for himself back when he wanted to switch to a new racket in 2022. Before he decided to retire, he actually wanted to keep playing, but with a racket more adapted to the modern game, similar to what he had done with the RF97 back in 2014. Little history lesson about that racket: he'd been playing with a 90 square inch frame for the better part of 15 years, but things were changing on tour and the injuries kept piling up for him, so he wanted a little bit more help with power and spin. Enter the RF97. It was a pretty radical change for him, but he adapted well and won a few more slams. While the idea behind the RF01 Pro is similar, so let's go over some of the specs. It's a 16 by 19 98 square inch frame with a 320 gram static weight. So it's 1 square inch smaller, 20 grams lighter, with the same string pattern compared to the RF97. Obviously, these specs are important and the differences are there, but arguably an even more important difference is in beam profile and design. The RF97 had a very traditional 21.5 millimeter constant box beam with a very traditional throat design, and obviously the signature PWS system at 3 and 9. Just looking at it, you can see that the RF01 Pro's beam profile is quite a bit different and certainly not as traditional. It has an oval beam design, no PWS system, a more modern throat shape, and it's a non-constant beam. I haven't received the exact specs yet, but it seems to be 22, 23, and then back to 21 millimeters from my measurements. This could be off, and if I do receive the specs before I put this video up, I'll post them here. But the important thing to understand here is that it's an undulating beam that goes thicker at the bottom portion of the hoop here and then gets thinner back in the throat. This is a beam profile that's become quite common on modern control rackets that aren't supposed to feel super traditional. We're talking radicals and pure strikes, and the idea behind it is to add some rigidity to the flex for more power, spin, and stability. The oval shape is also key because it cuts through the air much quicker than a traditional box beam, and the idea behind that is to generate easier racket head speed. They're actually calling this Saber Tech, obviously in reference to Federer's secret attack by Roger blocked return, but it is kind of funny they're giving it a name. To me, this beam design makes sense considering what Federer wants from this racket, but I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw it, I was a little bit worried about how that was going to translate on court. Non-constant oval beams don't usually have that same classic feel and connection to the ball that you get on something like a Pro Staff or RF97, and honestly, I didn't think Federer would like something like this. Even though the RF97 was a major change coming from a 90 square inch frame, it still kept that traditional feel, which I'm sure was a major part of the reason why Federer was comfortable making the switch, and yeah, I didn't think that was going to be here on the RF01 Pro. Then I saw a couple things that started changing my mind. For one, the lack of technology. Obviously, technology has become very important in modern rackets because it makes them forgiving and playable at lower weight specs, but it also takes away from a bit of that classic feel. There's not much technology in the RF01 Pro. Nothing in the layup to give it more stability or a bigger sweet spot, just good old graphite like we know and love. There is one thing though: foam filling. Yes, the RF01 Pro is foam-filled, which will make a lot of people happy and others not so much. Foam-filled rackets are very common on the Pro Tour because they have a way of dampening vibrations without negatively altering the feel. It's a unique sensation, but one that I've always appreciated, and for reference, the RF97 was also foam-filled. That's about it for the technology and specs. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the design, but you can also go watch that RF01 lineup introductory video if you want to see a little bit more. Honestly, there's not that much going on. It's black with silver accents, and it's also got that signature color shifting Wilson paint that goes gray in the right light. There are a couple other design elements to note, like the pinstripe in the throat that's meant to symbolize Federer's 2 sets of identical twins, and also the butt cap is RF branded, not Wilson branded. That does actually bring me nicely into another point. This is an RF branded racket by Wilson. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it is interesting to see how that develops in the future. Finally, there's a leather grip, and it's a really good leather grip. None of that cheap stretchy stuff that was on the last couple of RFs. It's back to a premium tan leather grip, and it looks absolutely gorgeous, especially with that RF branding right there. Now we're finally going to get into the playability, because we all want to know if it plays as good as the hype, and I'm not going to lie, guys, I haven't been this excited to talk about a racket in a very long time. A lot of that has to do with Federer, but also, I'm going to say it right now, this is a phenomenal frame. It's certainly not a marketing ploy. It has some amazing, unique playability, and I'm sure it's going to be very popular for a lot of players. I also might have to bring this review indoors at some point because the sun is setting and I am nowhere near done talking about this racket. As soon as I hit my first couple of shots, all of those worries I had about how the non-constant beam and less traditional design could negatively affect feel washed away. It has an epic feel, and I promise I'm not letting myself get carried away. The sweet spot is extremely well defined, the ball pocketing is crisp and responsive, and the foam filling does exactly what it's supposed to do. It dampens the negative feedback while still allowing that positive thwack of feel to make its way down into your hand when you do make good contact. It is obviously a little more dampened than just straight up graphite, but not in a way that negatively affects feel. Personally, I've always found that foam helps to make a racket feel more solid because of the way it softens that negative feedback. It's similar in a way to what a dampener does, but not as intense. I honestly couldn't be happier with the feel, and during the first 5 minutes of my playtest, I couldn't wipe the smile off my face. It has that addictive factor that feels so good every time you make contact with the ball. Now this racket has a 65 RA, so it's somewhere in the middle between soft and stiff, but in terms of how the ball feels coming off the string bed, it feels more like a precision point and shoot type of racket than one of those soft grab and guide the ball frames. That is what I was expecting and really what I was hoping for. Federer has always preferred that point and shoot type of control because it complements his fast attacking style extremely well. Soft control is great if you want that extra split second to grab and place the ball, but point and shoot precision is more responsive when you're going full gas because you want the ball to pop off the string bed right away exactly where you're pointing the racket. I'm starting to think I prefer that stiffer type of control because I had an awesome time smacking the ball around with this thing. It responded extremely well to my input, and whenever I did make a mistake, it was my fault and definitely not the racket's. So there you go. Feel is amazing. It's definitely not got that jarring feel of a Radical or the totally non-traditional feel of a Pure Strike 97, but still, it's not as classic in feel as the RF 97 or even the Pro Staff 97. The constant traditional box beam on those rackets gives them an extremely consistent flex that, dare I say, feels a little bit more standard than what you get on the RF01 Pro. When I say standard, I definitely don't mean worse. I just mean the frames aren't taking over at all. They're more of a vehicle for you to do exactly what you want onto the ball. With the RF01 Pro, you'll definitely feel like the racket does act on the ball a little bit more by itself. It does have a slightly higher launch angle and just generally feels like it grips at the ball a little bit more for spin and depth, and that's exactly what Federer was looking for when developing it. More power and spin, obviously, and I'll get into more detail in those sections later, but it also makes the racket a touch harder to control than both the Pro Staff and RF 97. You'll notice that most when you try to slow down your swing to hit with more margin. When you're not taking a fast, full cut of the ball, it is a little bit more wild than those rackets. That's a sacrifice you kind of know you're going to make when you go for more power and spin, and the important thing here is that it feels incredibly solid, precise, and consistent when you are pressing on the gas. The whole idea here is to complement an attacking style. When Federer got older, he obviously wanted to end points a little bit quicker, which makes total sense, and even in the marketing material, it's pretty obvious they want it to go to players who want precision when going big. I think they totally nailed the whole feel and control profile. It's got that addictive factor that I was so hoping it would have, while also not feeling totally traditional. Just look at the Mont Blanc in the background. That is, you can't really see it, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Wow. Stability is a bit of a double-edged sword. Lengthwise, it's elite, one of the more stable rackets out there today, and that's because of the higher static weight, the 325 swing weight, and this undulating beam profile. You can really feel it stay firm on contact. It never got pushed around to the point where I wanted to add lead at 12 o'clock or in the handle, but that is a bit of a different story in terms of torsional stability. Obviously, one of the big talking points here is that it doesn't have the PWS system that's been on every single Pro Staff ever, I think. I didn't really think that much about it when I first saw the racket, because because this was so obviously not a pro staff, but on court, I did feel like I was missing a little something at those 3 and 9 o'clock positions. Now, I'm not gonna lie, the rackets I review nowadays very rarely require weight to optimize playability. A bit of lead tape can help enhance certain things and personalize the frame, but actually required very rarely. So I was pretty surprised when it was noticeably lacking in torsional stability, but it actually does make sense when you consider the fact that there is little to no stabilization tech here. A lot of rackets before this more techie era almost required lead on the sides. It's a similar story here because it is a bit raw, and when a racket is raw, one of the first things to go is torsional stability. I added about 4 grams at 3 and 9 and felt that that was the perfect amount, and that also expanded the sweet spot to make it a bit more forgiving. I do think it's playable in stock form, don't get me wrong, but you will notice that it has quite a small sweet spot that can be a little bit punishing and fluttery despite the solid feel of that foam-filled graphite. Now, to be honest, if I were to switch to this racket, I'm not sure I would want to add lead because one of the best characteristics here is just how rapid and maneuverable it feels. I've never thought pro staffs or even the RF97s were particularly slow, at least relative to their weight category, but this puts them to shame. For a racket that has a 320 gram static weight and a 325 swing weight, it is so easy to swing and bring quickly through contact. It's pretty incredible how much faster this oval beam in modern design is compared to the box beam of the pro staffs. Obviously, if you do decide to add weight to the 3 and 9 o'clock positions, you're going to take away from a bit of that easy racket head speed and maneuverability, and I'm just not sure it's worth it. Since this is an attacking racket, you want to be able to accelerate it quickly through contact, and because this design makes that easier, that's a huge positive to its overall playability. Yes, expanding the sweet spot would make it easier to make consistently good contact, but it would also slow it down, and once you're comfortable with its torsional stability, you probably won't even need the lead. I also have to say, this design is quick all over the court, not just on spinny forehands or ground strokes the way something like an arrow is. This thing is whippy and reactive at the net, quick to accelerate through contact, and easy to maneuver around the rest of the court. It's a jack of all trades in terms of quickness, and that, again, complements an attacking player very well. Now, obviously, the 01 Pro isn't a power racket, but that is one of the areas Federer wanted to improve on this design. He wanted to make power more easily accessible, and that is definitely the case here. A precise sweet spot is a key element in giving you the confidence to go for big shots, and both this and any version of the Pro Staffs have that, but we already know that. Making the racket faster has made it easier to generate the racket head speed you need to create your own power. That's the first big difference between this and the Pro Staffs. The other is this beam design. A thin box beam simply cannot retain as much of the ball's energy as an undulating beam that gets thicker at the bottom portion of the hoop like this can. This beam is designed to remain more sturdy on contact, which yes, does take away from a bit of that classic pure ball feel, but it also helps generate more power and depth. That's why, while it may be slightly less consistent, it also has a much more well-rounded power profile compared to the rackets it replaces. It's exactly what they wanted to do, and I'm going to say it again, complements an attacking player extremely well because it's a racket that's precise, powerful, and quick, so you can really dictate points yourself. I'm not going to spend too long talking about spin because the sun is setting and it's obviously not this racket's most outstanding feature, but again, it's another area that has improved thanks to the quicker swing speed and this more modern beam profile. Like with power, a quicker racket makes it easier to generate the necessary racket head speed for spin, and that was definitely my experience with this thing. Also, the fact that it does have a slightly higher launch angle makes it feel like you've got a bit more purchase over the ball to spin it, so I know I just said that adds a bit of inconsistency to it, but if you do feel comfortable generating spin for control, well, that basically cancels it out. I do want to say one thing, this is not a Wilson shift. I know it kind of looks like one, but it definitely doesn't have that same snappy graphite feel that almost feels like it amplifies spin as the ball exits the string bed. Here you get nice pocketing, but no spin amplification. It just feels a bit better when you're hitting with spin compared to a super traditional racket. Other than that, no spin tech, which is a good thing considering this racket's target audience. There's no spin grommets, the string bed is quite dense in the middle of the sweet spot, so it's not a spin racket by any stretch of the imagination. So if I haven't made it abundantly clear, I love this racket. Playtesting it over the last several weeks has made me very happy because it's one of those frames that just feels so good every time you make contact with the ball. If any of you were worried, like me, that this line was going to go in a different direction, don't be. It really does color the perfect line between modern and traditional, so I think a lot of people are going to really like it. There is one specific type of player that I think it's going to work best for, though: modern attacking players. Obviously, its spin, power, and control profiles fit the bill perfectly, but its feel is what separates it from a lot of other rackets out there. there. Good feel can be that little X factor that gives you the confidence to go big, and a lot of modern rackets nowadays lack a bit of that feel and connection to the ball. Now obviously it's going to be super popular, at least at the beginning because of the Federer name, but I am very excited to see how it does beyond that because it deserves to be taken seriously on its own merits. I'm not necessarily an attacking player, but when I did try to stand a little closer to the baseline, take the ball early and really dictate points, I could tell that's when this racket really came into its own. I'm going to spend a lot more time with it in the next couple of months, really trying to dial it in, and I'll let you know what kind of customizations I come up with, but it's an awesome stick, and I'm really happy that this is what Federer came up with. With that said, that is going to be the end of this review just in time for the sunset. I am going to be back in Vancouver for the next video, so back to normalcy there. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and remember that if you do want to demo the RF01 Pro or any racket in the RF01 lineup, you can come visit us in store, or you can check them out online at racketsandrunners.ca.